And my name is Max Boykin, the manager of the Save HIV Funding Campaign, and welcome to our fifth part of our training series, our Save HIV Funding training series, which is all about making sure that our legislators are held accountable. We have officially started Accountability August, and this has been our advocacy of summer training series. And this again being our fifth in the series, this is one is focused around direct action training. The first one was around legislator engagement. The second one being focused around uh, how in which you could do community teach-ins. The third one being around traditional media and engagement, focused around being able to place op-eds and letters to the editor in local communities. The fourth one is focused around digital advocacy and how in which we use social media. And this one, our final one, which we are partnered with our friends with Housing Works, and Anthony will be helping me with this training around direct action and civil disobedience. With that, this is a space for folks to be able to ask questions. I've said this earlier, but I want to invite folks. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat and or raise your hand during this presentation to be able to ask the questions that you do have. We do encourage people to ask questions about this, even if you're a seasoned person that has done many a different direct action to the folks that have potentially never done a direct action before in their life. But we encourage folks to have questions during this time and space, again, using the raising hand function or putting the question in the chat. We also encourage people to continue to put their introduce themselves in the chat with their name, pronouns, organization, or coalition affiliation, and where they are in the country, just so we understand who we all have here. And I thank you so very much for joining us and being here with us. With that, Jeremiah, if you don't mind sharing the slide. Thank you. Like I said, this is our direct action training, and thank you for joining the Save HIV Funding Campaign. And next slide, and I would like to go ahead and introduce our speaker. As I've said this before, this uh, training wouldn't be possible without Anthony, but also a lot of the work of Save HIV Funding Campaign throughout this year, but also as an organization and leading a lot of the work that they're doing to also protect not just domestic HIV funds, global HIV funds, but also pressing around democracy. Without further ado, the Vice President of Advocacy at Housing Works, Anthony.
Hey everyone, thanks Max, thanks Jeremiah. Um, I have a first rule to myself and a first agreement when I'm engaging people is that you see my face. So I'm gonna say sorry, I have some issue with my video. It's not the ideal when you're doing these kind of trainings because I want to engage with you, and even if we're remote, we're in a square. I'm sorry about that, but I will do my best and I'll let you know when I'm excited in some form or fashion here with all of you. And I hope you also see this as a form of not just us being experienced in this, but you all have your own experiences. You all have your own experiences not only in your states and your neighbors and your community. So when we talk about direct action and one civil disobedience, I welcome people here because I know many of you have engaged in this kind of work and care deeply about the work. And so I'm excited and glad to be here with everyone. So I just want to bring that up first. Do we want to go to the next slide? So I'm going to skip this real quickly. It's just basically telling that we've been long-term in housing ones because we come from the ACT UP movement. We were formed from that civil disobedience, direct action, advocacy is our not only our value, but is in our blood in terms of the work and in our brick and mortar buildings and folks that come in through. So I just wanted to say that. Next slide. I use this for my trainings with my staff. So this is just basically what I would like to go through around civil disobedience, but it'll be tied into other direct action practices and ideas, so they kind of combine. So we can go to the next slide.
No, go ahead and take this. So one of the reasons why do we do direct action? Why do we take up and do these things? A lot of it is around power, and we understand that there are different types of power, and it's the ability to act or create or control or prevent change. And one of the things that we are trying to have is change around who and how people are making decisions around HIV funding, be it domestically or globally, but also how in which people are also making decisions in this country. And rather than always focusing on the power of the state and dismantling the state of capitalism, instead of building power from below. And there's also things to think about is how and which are we building power with our communities and building power together. And direct action is one of those forms. Next slide. And then when we think about power with and power to and power within, these are also things to think about how in which we're related to the different people and those that are making decisions. When we think about Congress making decisions around HIV funding, when we think about our different states making around decisions around who has the right and who has access to voting. These are important things to think about as we're also thinking about direct action as a form of pushing up against those who do have power. And are we trying to have power with, which finding common ground, or our power to the potential of every person in our group or people to shape their life and world. Those are also things that we're also trying to make sure that people are able to do when they're also engaging and thinking through how in which they're engaging with direct action. And then we're also thinking about who has power over or power of the ability to influence other people's or groups or decision makers. That's also important as we think about who in which we also think about when targeting in direct action, when we're thinking about who in which we're also having be a part of direct actions. These are important things to think about when moving forward with thinking about different actions that you take. Next slide. And then we also have a direct action is a way of confronting power using taxes that are outside of those prescribed by existing political structures. A direct action can demand something from a person or entity in power. It can disrupt the normal function of a system. It can destroy parts of an institution or system that oppresses people. And it can also dismantle a system in a way that will not allow it to continue to function in the same way again. That can be many some of the direct actions that I've taken, and some would say different rallies. If a rally is taking up space and people are not able to function in the regular day to day, be it move to the regular spaces that they're going, if it's taking up part of the street, or when taking up parts of building and doing occupations in different areas, and that includes state houses or as people have done different occupations when it comes down to people getting access to housing. There's different ways in which people can talk about the ways in which they dismantle systems, the way in which they are demanding something from people, and we will talk through many of the different forms of direct action throughout this training. Next slide. When you're thinking about planning a direct action, and we're going to go deeper into detail, and I'm gonna let Anthony like definitely go into this even deeper. But some of the things to think about is what are the goals? It is always important to think about what is the actual goal of the action. Is it to take up space? Is it to disrupt? Is it to demand a particular action from decision makers? Those need to be clear before going into any type of direct action, and it's important for it when thinking about recruiting. Messaging is also important. What do you want the story of this direct action to tell is an important thing to think about when taking any type of action. And when using, and I take this a theory from like around action logic, when you sum up what a direct action is, your actions should speak for themselves. They should make immediate, natural sense to out onlookers. If someone's looking at your action, they should know what the story that you're trying to tell. And that's why thinking about the messaging that you have for these type of actions is truly important. Um, One of the other things to also think about within this is your target and your audience. Not necessarily the same people or same set of individuals, but it's important to think about who you're actually targeting. And those could be decision makers, but it also could be people that influence the decision maker. It could be the voters of said decision maker. It could be community members. While also your audience is also who are going to be the onlookers and not necessarily the one and the same, but are definitely something to think about both when you're thinking about your messaging, how your target is taking the messaging, but also the audience that you are also trying to influence. Um, Always important for direct action is press and documentation. If you're not documenting it, if it doesn't have a press value to it, then there's a question of what it does. You can still take up space and do different things, but you want to be able to magnify that and you want other people to be able to see it. And that is why engagement of press and being able to document and tell your own story of how in which the direct action comes about and what you're trying to also push up against, or and give and the community that you're also trying to build power for is always important to think through connected to that messaging piece. We will talk a little bit about this. Roles, hugely important. You need them. And there's a number of different roles when it comes down to a direct action and or civil disobedience that need to be talked through and think through in order to make sure that it goes off effectively. It's not just the people that are the center stage of said action. It's all the auxiliary support that makes an action possible and make it as positive it needs to be. If you don't think about as much around your police liaisons or your marshals or even the people that are in charge of making sure people get snacks. I've seen where without making sure that you're properly have the support needed around the action, it can really make actions that you want to be extremely powerful and that look amazing, not feel as good and not go as well because you didn't have the proper people in all the roles needed. Um, no action is complete without making sure that there's turnout, and also to understand what shifts around if your turnout shifts in any way. I've had actions where people have pulled out last minute, and that does happen, and that is okay. It is, and then sometimes it's thing of thinking about what are your next up plans and what are you needed to shift in different direct actions when those type of things happen. And then always important to be able to continue to move forward, and important for any campaign work that you are doing is to be able to debrief. And one thing before I wanted to go before we have Anthony continue to move forward and talking through this is direct actions and civil disobedience are tactics used in a larger strategy of the Save HIV funding campaign and in campaigns in general to be able to again get closer to our goals of saving HIV funding, but also making sure that more of our community are able to see what is going on and are able to engage, and to be able to push up against those people that are making decisions that are harming our communities. And we want to make sure that that is front and center whenever we're thinking about different direct actions to take, is to also push back against those people that are trying to have power over us and to also have power with our communities. With that, I'm going to pass it on over to talk about more of what is civil disobedience with Anthony.
So we had to re-emphasize power here. And when I talk about civil disobedience, and what I want to state here is civil disobedience is a way, a form of power contesting other power. Those who are deciding to make decisions that are harming us. And so we take different aspects. So it in itself has a powerful form. And we have to understand that it's rooted still in a moral conviction, but it's also about resistance that's strategic. We engage in civil disobedience as a form not to only raise awareness, but to spotlight injustices. And what's really important also, in most of every direct action, it is meant to be nonviolent. It has to be equated to some peace, even as a nonviolent resistance. Hmm. Right. And so when we talk about protesting and demonstrating, is to identify that we have a responsibility with our own power and to ourselves to take action. And many times, civil disobedience is seen as an escalation point, a point where everything that's been done, meeting with elected officials, whatever, with decision makers, have not resulted in what was needed, and there needs to be some civil disobedience. Our bodies being put on the line to take an arrest for a cause, for an action, or it is already there, meaning that we are so much under attack as being now under the Trump administration that we have to do these kind of civil disobedience to spotlight or to force to get meetings where we're not getting meetings with the powers that be, those that make decisions. Next slide. So I always go talking about civil disobedience as for Martin Luther King and his philosophy about nonviolence and basic elements of nonviolence, right? We're not seeking, we seek to go against oppression. So it's our humane and human way to fight back. But it's also not about defeating, eliminating the opponent, but it is to win the public discourse on narratives that perhaps are allowing them to continue attacking us, right? And it's a nonviolent method again, and it's also a way to resisting through internal, physical, and also spiritual, mindset, where we're putting our bodies on the line to get arrested. It's about how we move forward and what more can we do, and what a civil disobedience has in terms of purpose, not only for those who are organizing, for those who are also engaging in it. Next one. So I always kind of talk about civil disobedience in different ways. I say this truly. You can never guarantee safety for every demonstrator or person who's engaging in CDs. However, you increase that chances of safety. You increase the chances that we are not only individually safe, but collectively safe when you have structure. Some of it, what Max was alluding to in terms of organizing and setting the steps, is how we can react quickly to a problem that arises when an arrest is occurring. And we have to, and y'all talk a little bit more about those mechanisms of those ideas or ways that we increase the chance of safety. I say that because in housing works, we've had plenty of civil disobedience. Many of you have been civil disobedience, and it depends on the day. Even police officers, how they're feeling and what they want to do and not do. We've known that for years. But it's also, I want to say for us, is love and caring is a really important ingredient. And I know it sounds weird when you talk about civil disobedience, love and caring. I'm not talking about loving, caring the folks that they're going to be arresting you. It is loving, caring for each other. We got to avoid physical violence directed against others, including police. Why? And I'll say this very frank. There are members of our community when they're joining on CDs that have different conditions or different identities or different ways have they engage with police. If someone with more privilege is being arrested with someone who has had historical issues with police, it is all our job to not create any physical violence because it will be played out on everyone who's doing the CD. And I have a perfect example of having a staff person where I had to go to court in November because of that. The way the police treated them. The other thing is actions that cause panic. We have to be, there are mechanisms to reduce that panic, and there are roles that people can play that I'll talk about later, including bringing weapons, right? That's another issue. I always tell my staff about recreational drugs. Uh, I love people who use drugs. That's me. I love people who use drugs. However, when we do civil disobedience, we need to be conscious of that. And then property alteration, what that basically means, and this has a fine line. It means when you're creating damage to a certain type of property. However, there are instances where we'll use paint or we'll use other mechanisms to make a point. And so I just want to know that this depends on your group, on your strategic resistance and conversations and planning what it means when you want to alter property or not. So I've always been a person that, yes, you don't want to damage property. Obviously, we're not creating fires and creating physical violence, but there's always a point where you want to figure out what that would do. Next slide. So why is it effective? And we can go to the next slide. I wanted to share, I always share this, is when uh, MLK was jailed, is effective because he helped be a catalyst and help spark people to do civil disobedience in nonviolent ways. So I just want to reiterate that. Next slide. I'm going to skip this also, but I want to go again. Why direct actions? Actually, Jeremiah, can you just go back? There's a little point I want to make there. Uh, yep, right there. Is again about direct action. It's about the path we take. And Martin Luther King in his letter to Birmingham, and folks who haven't read it, and I hope everyone has read it, tells you how you create that tension from and the letter is aspiring into understanding what that tension looks like for community and how we refuse to negotiate and confront the issues. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Next slide. So why is it affected? I've said this before. It's to increase public support. It is to either the narrative is on our side or the narrative is not on our side, and we have to create that public support for the movement. In this case, obviously, in our work around not only HIV and AIDS domestically and internationally, but our very same communities, right? Our trans communities and others. The way things are being played out in this administration and the way the media is taking on is important to do civil disobedience that can change and create more public support, change public opinion, or increase public opinion. And so those tactics are important. Again, it's a powerful tool because we're challenging systemic oppression and social justice through a social justice lens, right? And these are strategies that we have to think through. But it garners media attention, like I said before. It legitimizes the movement and attracts support. What I mean by that, when you gain attention, you spotlight something, you end up getting sometimes more allies or sometimes unlikely allies in the fight. And you never know based on the civil disobedience. And I'll be frank, sometimes you get other sets of enemies too, other set of people that want to jump in. But that's not the point here. The point is that you are bringing people together in a cause, putting the bodies on your line, and creating attention to that issue. In our case, obviously, it's not just about saving HIV funding, but the entire infrastructure and the entire movement of what we're trying to protect here and save. So again, challenging the status quo, and I'll mention more about that later in terms of targets and how people think about civil disobedience and organizations. And this all comes from plenty of other groups that do this. So I've been able to combine different ideas and different modalities and trainings into one based on all different types of movements. I want to say it's also an expression of justice that makes people feel good. I feel so excited when someone says they come out from a civil disobedience engagement and they feel so empowered or they feel good, even while their bodies were put on the line. Um, this is also about putting a face to the issue. We can talk all the data we want to prove our points, but if there is no face to that data, to direct action and civil disobedience, or civil being an escalation point, then we are failing each other on that. And we end up not having an effective part of the movement and strategy. Next slide. So how you justify to do a civil disobedience as one example of direct action. The urgency and the severity of the problem, right? Now let's be frank. The urgency is here. The severity is here already when it comes to HIV and AIDS and other forms, right? And other issues that impact our communities. Medicaid cuts, everything you can think of, right? So we already have justification. Potential positive impacts for organizing civil disobedience. Always think about how it's going to be perceived and what kind of positive impact is from that civil disobedience, right? But also think about the potential harmful effects of organizing a CD. And what I mean by that, not every time you have to do civil disobedience. Sometimes you have to calculate that, strategize together. Would it be more harmful to do so? Would it really move the cause? Would it create some issues where our participants and outsiders? Those are things that we all have to strategically think through. And this changes state by state, neighborhood by neighborhood, national, even nationwide, right? And it's also, you're justifying because you're convincing people. You're convincing people that you're putting your body on the line, getting arrested, means that I'm doing this because I need to tell you, you need to be part of this, join us. You need to fight back with us. And if I'm willing to sacrifice my body in some form, right? And I understand others won't be able to, that could aspire people to do more, even if they don't do civil disobedience, but at least maybe become a member of the coalition or do something else, tell their story. That's why it's also important to how you justify. And I think these are 5 ways we measure that. Next slide. So I go into this piece about which is over the years I've learned to try to put where to do civil disobedience, and that's always hard. Like, where are you going to actually spotlight the issue? I mean, it's obviously the target is the clear thing, as Max was saying, but I've had over the years thought about how you think about it from a point of tension and a point of intervention, where to do a civil disobedience. So I've called one point of destruction. And what I mean by that, and it's not nothing negative, is where things are being extracted, where things are being dismantled, and by who. And so that point of destruction, for example, if it is um, if it is the destruction of the CDC in terms of undermining them. Who's doing that? Who are the key people? So that's what I mean by point of destruction. But there's also a point of production where the resources and supports are being created. So sometimes you can do a civil disobedience in a place where you may have a friendly situation in a space where you know the resources and supports can be there. Or where you may know where an agency or a decision maker is producing that resource and support to dismantle something or to make changes. So I call that point of production. Then this point of decision, which is the most important one, is where you confront the decision maker. Max talked about target. So who has the power to get you what we want, right? Who is ultimately doing that? Who has about to make change? And that's a point of decision for me and for all of us, right? So we have perfect examples in this administration in terms of who are the points of decision. And so I want to just reemphasize that. Next slide. I want to go into actually what happens at a CD, right? And the legal and risking arrest, right? Because when I say putting our bodies on the line, what does that really mean? And I want to reemphasize, I am not a lawyer. This is not meant to give legal advice. This is about to give strategic resistant advice. This is about how you can decide for yourselves or decide with us in terms of Saving HIV Funding Coalition to do CDs, right? To be for all of us to be collectively prepared. So you can do sit-in occupations. Um, and sorry, these are pictures from Housing Work. So I tend to do these trainings mostly many times to our staff. But there's sitting occupations. You can sit in an office. You can sit in the point of decision, right? Could be a hearing. Could be many places, right? And this is when it comes to DC. But this is the same thing when it comes to our own states and where we want to do sit-ins. Unauthorized demonstrations, right? Marches, rallies, die-ins. We all know what these all are, right? Police are not being notified. We're doing it because we have to do it. And I'll explain more when police are not being notified what roles play to mitigate that as part of civil disobedience. And then street block, right? Nothing more beautiful than all of us being sitting in the street and blocking traffic. Uh, it makes a big splash in the news. It creates a disruption that's necessary, right? In terms of getting out in the news, but getting public attention. When you do these outside kind of like civil disobediences, the public takes notice. And maybe they didn't understand the issue, but maybe they start understanding the issue. And I want to explain how you can use the public in certain roles for CDs that can help the public understand why you're doing it. So next slide. And I want to slow down and remind people to put information in the chat, questions and all that, because I'm moving a little bit quickly, but I also know this can be overwhelming types of information. But I hope that I'm keeping it simple in the sense of connecting to everybody here, how we think of how CDs go about. So what happens again in CDs? Knowing the boundaries of arrest and non-arrest areas. What do I mean by that? When you're deciding on civil disobedience, there are actually locations where you know that it will create an arrest. What I mean by that, I'll give you an example. In DC, it's always inside any of the halls. It's always inside the rotunda or sometimes an elected official's office. That all depends. But there are boundaries for that. Most of the time in DC, to be honest, if you do something outside one of the buildings, you really don't always get an arrest unless you are blocking, doing a sit-in, blocking a doorway. So part of it is knowing the boundaries of arrest and non-arrest, because that's about strategy. If your intention of civil disobedience is to get arrested, right? You want to find a way you can get arrested, but you also want to find a way you can hold off as long as possible the arrest to get attention. And I'll explain that a little bit later as well. But one of the things that people need to know, we take emergency info. So anytime you're doing this, you should take emergency info for everyone. And I'll explain that further. Um, Medical, everything you can to know about the person, because you're going to need that when the person decides to do a civil disobedience. And it includes also even people who are surrounding, and I'll talk more about that. Uh, Folks never understand, but paper and pen helps. Even though we have digital, we have cameras and all that, it does help because you can lose a video. A police officer, in the times I've seen them knock my phone off where I didn't have the notes that I needed, but if I had a pen and paper, I had documentation there too. A lot of snacks. Um, when people do civil disobedience, they have a choice, and I'll go over this more. You want to hold their ID, their money, their keys, their belongings, so that they get arrested. Part of the thing about getting arrested is once you are in solidarity and you're in, particularly in DC, in jail, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to expedite processing you. So the more things you have on you, the longer it takes, and that means for everybody collectively in there that are in jail. So you want to make sure, and some people want to keep their money, their keys, and all that. That's understandable. We're not forcing anyone that way, but it saves time. And I will tell you, when you hold your cell phone, there's a lot of rules around your cell phone as well. And I'll go over that too. Uh, it's a job to keep in touch with the CDers, and that's where a lot of roles that I'll discuss later will play out. Mm. And then finally, uh, this is a team effort when you do CDs. So you always need two or more support people there. And I'll explain that later when it comes to roles. Does not work when you have one person or you have even just four. This is a much strategic resistance that you want to do. Next slide. Mm, Let's talk about this. This is towards DC. So I just want to be clear again, right? This is when you do a civil in DC. When you're doing civil disobedience in any of our states, these parameters change sometimes similarly or drastically, right? And the difference in these CDs in DC is that most of the Capitol Police, Park Police, other authorities are very used to it because it is the capital, right? It is DC. However, safety and the way they treat folks or the way they do things is still similar across the country. So I just want to re-mention that again. So most of the time, there's a warning, and normally it's three warnings. They'll basically say you need to get up and all. But I want to be giving this new climate and conditions that we have in DC. Sometimes it's been only one or none of a warning. And that again goes back to understanding the level of the arrest or the situation you're going to be in when you do a civil disobedience. One of the things I've learned is when you're thinking about that, you may be able to, I've kind of learned already, depending on the building you do the actual civil disobedience and the type of officers that are there, because they're moving around, that you can actually tell if they're going to give you one warning or three warnings, because they're starting to see a pattern. And one of the things you should do when you're organizing is think about that pattern. Does it happen more in the Dirksen building versus the other building? Like, it's important to start strategically thinking about that. Choices to stay or be arrested or leave. If someone is doing a civil disobedience, engaging to get arrested, at any point, uh, you, you you have to understand when you need to stay or you if you decide that you have to leave, right? That you decide you don't want to do it. There is points in a CD where somebody may decide I no longer want to do it, right? But understand that there's a certain point, like particularly after the third warning of an officer, it's very difficult for someone to stand up and walk away in a civil disobedience. And the other thing is, when you do civil disobedience, you want to make sure everyone that's in the crowd that's supporting it is stepping away, that there is some follow, and there are roles for people to help do that in terms of safety, right? Part of it is you get arrested, you go in the vehicle, you get handcuffed, you're gonna get frisked, you get the plastic cuffs most of the time. Um, I recommend always when they put the plastic cuffs, if you think it's too tight, do not just say that to the officer, yell it out. And I'll explain later. There are roles again that why you need to yell it out because there are people there to support this, and so you want to do so. And I'll explain that even further later. Most of the time, you get placed in a holding area, and sometimes you don't even get placed and get sent over to DC 9, which is the jail over Metro Police. Sometimes you get placed in a holding area, and they process you there. Sometimes they, if it's the parks, sometimes they process you right at the park. So it changes up all the time. What's important here is that you have a support team that's following that up and keeping close eye where people are being taken. Again, you get photographed, you get fingerprinted, your pocket's empty. Why I said before, have the lease on you because your pockets get empty and they have to process every little thing down to a piece of paper in terms of processing you. So that takes time. Mm. Strip search is unlikely. I only put that there because you never know, and it's important to have all scenarios. They're going to ask you for information. They're only required to give you name, address, and ID. Uh, and anything beyond just direct action, when you're engaging with police, you don't have to. You have rights. You don't have to answer every question. You don't even have to talk to them while you're arrested and while you're being pulled in. You can ask their name, address, and ID, and that's fine. Uh, there will be asked for a security number if you don't have one. There's other mechanisms for that, so I have not worried about that in DC. But again, part of learning us doing DCDs is what's going to continue happening under this administration in terms of their crackdown, their pushback on protests. So these can change. You're going to get a summons, a dex appearance. Um, I'll go over into what it means to post and forfeit later. But disciplinary is nothing but like getting a ticket as if you were uh, a parking ticket. It's not going to reflect on your record in any way. And I'll explain something that would reflect on your record, given how many times you get arrested at a certain point around civil disobedience in DC now, because there are rules there now too. Arraignment, sometimes that would happen. Um, you can request the charges to be dropped, or you can plead guilty. Sometimes pleading guilty means just doing the community service. I'll tell you for housing works, many times when we're engaging in coalition, we give the community service, we sign off to help with that. And CBOs can do that for each other when we're doing civil disobedience work to move things faster for the individual, particularly because their livelihood, they may have to lose, take some time away from their jobs. Because obviously we all know that when you're doing a CD, that's not your professional job. You're getting paid to do something else. You're doing something else in your life. Next slide. This is a little bit more. This is where I was talking about post and forfeit in DC, not in New York and any other place. There's a post and forfeit where you get it's $50 per person. That's basically what you're paying to be released. Again, it doesn't count as a conviction or a guilty plea. It does show up in your record as an arrest. And why? It's because they're tracking how many people you may be doing in a given month or week. And that sometimes escalates if you do what I've understood is 3 to 4 in the span of 6 months. But this is not set in stone, meaning if you have multiple forfeits in a certain span of time, they may give you a death appearance where you have to come back to court. However, interesting enough, and folks can jump in and tell me this is look differently, but when there's a lot of civil disobediences happening in DC all at the same time, and they have to process many people, I've noticed that this is not set in stone. There have been people in civil disobedience from different groups who have done more than three or four in even in a month, and they just got into post and forfeit and not a death appearance. But that changes every month. I feel as if they're changing the rule every month, or it depends on how the white coats, which is the supervisors and the captains, feel on that given day. If it's too much paperwork, you name it, it changes the parameters. Next slide. I'm going to go over my notes real quick on this part here. Um, in the event you're not offered a post and forfeit, again, you get a court date. Uh, and you return to DC to attend your court date. There's been sometimes they allow you to come in by Zoom uh, instead of actually coming in person to DC. I have recommended most of the time to come in person if you think you're planning to do more civil disobediences moving forward, uh, because it just helps you with the judge coming in person. But people's life gets disrupted by that, right? And so it depends on your group or your individual choice there. But in the end, it's the judge telling you. Uh, one of the things you want to know is that, again, the maximum penalty has normally been a post and forfeit. So that should give some relief that civil disobedience is still uh, not being cracked down and not being pushed back in DC at least. People are still doing civil disobediences. The process is still looking the same, and there's been post and forfeit. That has not changed. One of the things you should know, your first court date, if it happens that way, if they ask you to go to court, it's expected two or three times in total. You may be expecting to go to court. Sometimes it's been one, but I just want to give you that the max has been that way. And again, community service, you don't normally is what to complete, and you can do it in your home state, the community service. So if you didn't get a posted forfeit, you were told to go to court, and the judge decides that the penalty is community service, you can do it in your home state most of the time. Hmm. Next slide. Again, when arrested in process, patted down, handcuffed, search, fingerprint, given ticket, post and forfeit. Hmm. Next slide. Hmm. So really important before you get arrested, how to prepare yourself, ourselves, right? Because it's the hope that we are going to engage in these kind of strategic resistance as part of civil disobedience. So, how to prepare yourself. So let me go quick because I changed this a little bit um, just to get it a little bit easier to think through. One, engaging in civil disobedience is very much about being out of your comfort zone. I'm going to be very honest. It's not about being comfortable. It's not even about being comfortable in making the decision. It's not even about being comfortable when you actually are doing the civil disobedience and even after, right? Um, and so the tactics have to be rational for you. You know, it does not mean that you would join straight away in a civil disobedience based on that, but it's important. Um, I always say you need to practice getting out of your comfort zone. It requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of trust in the group that you're in, who are organizing it, and it requires steps to get to that trust, to create comfort. For example, one of the things I think is important, practice in public, right? Organizing low risk actions, be creative, learn to call out when something is wrong is part of practicing it, right? They require, for example, like everyone to make a lot of noise, right? Or wear the same state of clothing, or lay down without blocking anything. um, are important kind of ways of practicing in public. But make sure you know your local laws and what things you can do and not do, because that plays out in different states. Now, in this case, I'm talking about DC, right? So there's a difference between civil disobedience and actually breaking the law. Even though civil disobedience is considered breaking the law, there's other forms of really breaking the law. And so you want to think about that. Uh, Practice is important again. I would think you should do a lot of role plays. Now, role plays have been challenging in this moment because so many of us are in Zoom. But I think there are creative ways that we can do that. Showing examples on video, anything we can do. But I do believe in role playing how the arrest will look, how would the resistance is. What if you have someone that doesn't follow the guidance that everyone had, right, to do it? Those are scenarios that you all of us have to think about always. Um, so it's important. Part of it is also talking about the legal aspects of participating. You have to always be clear what are the consequences for everyone. And I went through some of that. But some of the things that can help with this um, is knowing your rights, right? Knowing your rights not only from your state, but what are the rights that you have when you're in DC is important. Um, there's other things. Route planning. What I call route planning is like familiar yourself with the area, identify exit and entry points when you're doing the civil disobedience, right? Find where, even know where the nearest hospital or medical station is, because you never know how people get harmed or hurt. Now, there is roles for that too, and I'll mention that later. Um, and again, I want to talk about when I talk about the phone, you want to minimize your digital footprint when your phone is on you in a civil disobedience, meaning the biometric access, your turn off the fingerprinting, turn off the actual camera visual, the face, is important. Uh, Set a strong password, secure some other communications supports and protections on your phone. Because when the officers take your phone, there is a history of how entrapment has happened just by just your phone. Next, let me go back into other things. Agreeing on your actions principles, meaning what are you doing to keep people safe, but what are the mechanisms to do so? Grow your group. The smaller the group is easy for law enforcement to break up a civil disobedience. Unless you decided that you're doing a sit-in in a small space or in an office or you're locking yourself to a door, that gives you more buying time. It's harder, but the smaller the group, the easier it is for them to not only break up or prosecute people, take them. And part of the roles you hear when you heard Max about marshals, that's part of how you can deflect that a little bit. Actually, a lot. Um, Next slide. So let's go to these areas. Examples of solidarity roles. I call them solidarity roles because, again, it's about a collective effort. It's a team effort when you're doing civil disobedience. Yes, there's probably a few only people getting arrested, but it requires the entire collective. Um, and so it's also about checking in, self care, and everything. And it's important. So there is certain roles that are clearly really important. Legal observers. You need someone that can keep track of who's getting arrested and make sure police follow the law. Now, I'm going to say this with a grain of salt. Police follow the law is not always the case, right? We know that historically. um, but you need legal observers. So it could be a lawyer. There is the National Lawyers Guild, but they're not always available, right? Because you can imagine how many protests more we're having nowadays. Um, so legal observers. And this is not in no particular order. I just put it out there. Jail support. What I mean by jail support, they also track the arrest, but they stay to the end. There's nothing more humiliating or demoralizing if you're a CDer and you're in jail and you get out and there's nobody outside waiting to cheer you, hug you, or whatever you need when you come out. There is no point of doing a CD if you don't have jail support. Why? Because you defeat the purpose of engaging new people into CDs because the rumor will go out, well, I was left alone. I was left behind. And our movement does not do that. Right? So that's why I say that very strongly because it's important. They also can have conversations with the precinct. How's it going? How longer is it going to be? Right? Most times in DC, It's been taking it can be taking an hour to 7 hours. That's why I've seen the range. It can go longer in terms of waiting for someone to come out. But legal observers need to prepare for that. Jail support needs to prepare for that. Now, this is where we go with the self-care. Well-being facilitators. What I mean by that is people who are handing out food and giving mental support. You have jail support that's keeping a close eye on everything, but you may need people who are going to go out there and go pick up the pizza or whatever it is. So when people come out of jail, because I know I'm either very cold and very hungry when I come out. And it's so loving when you have someone give you some food or some first aid. Now, I want to go back on something here that I missed. If you're a CDR and you get arrested and something you get hurt, a bruise or something damaged, right? Most officers are going to tell you, are you are you hurt? Right? If you believe you're hurt, just let you know that they will not take you to jail. They will take you first to the nearest medical hospital and so on. That will delay longer your processing being out. Just want to give you a heads up. So I'll give you an example in a different way. If you are need of medicine, so sometimes people take medication. So one of the things that a role for when people are signing up for CD is to know what kind of medical issues you're having. Do you need your medicines on you? Are you able to hold off your medicine? If you have to take your medicine, officers are not allowed to give you the medicine. They will have to take you to a hospital and someone there will have to give you your medicine. That again delays the amount of time you are going to be released. So I forgot to say that earlier, but it reminded me when I said well-being. um, Court support. So I used to come from a background of what they call community lawyering. Basically is that you use legal tactics, but use community organizing to support it and back it up. And so many times you may have someone who don't go beyond the post and forfeit, maybe because they've been arrested so many times that they now have to go to court, right? They've done it too many times. Uh, I luckily have done it too many times. I haven't been called to court yet, but that will probably be different next week. But I have someone who now has been given a packed charge of saying resisting arrest. And what I'm starting to see is officers to cover themselves, and this is across this country always, way to cover their fatal, cruel, harmful mistakes is by saying that we were resisting arrest while we were doing the CD, right? And when you're doing the CD, that's why I tell people do not go limp. You go limp, they consider that also resisting arrest. If you accidentally watch your footing, look at where they're holding you. Keep a close eye on how they're holding you, right? Because if you trip and they accidentally trip with you, they also put that on as resisting arrest. You can see how they play games with this. I have someone I have to go to court in November to prove she was not resisting arrest. And we had the videos and all that. And that's why some of these roles are so important because you're observing. You're observing not only the CD, the actual action, you're observing how they get arrested, you're observing how they be brought to jail. So court support, when that happens, I really believe that you have to have an organized group that could go to court with them. Again, not leaving them alone, not leaving the person to go to court alone. Most judges get influenced sometimes by seeing a crowd of people behind somebody, particularly for this. It's a civil disobedience case. Most judges just put it away. It's the officers that decided, or the government in this case for one of my folks, that the Trump administration decided that they want to take this to court, and we're fighting back on it. Next set of slides for the roles. Picture takers. You want someone to take pictures. It's both for safety and future building. What I mean by that, safety because you want to document what's happening, maybe because you also want to spotlight to the media, but you also because if something goes a way that's harmful to someone, you have the pictures. Future building is because those pictures make great momentum building, right? A picture says 1,000 words, right? It inspire someone to join us. It could change the narrative. It can change the way things are going on or the way messaging is happening from the folks that are oppressing us, right? Folks who are creating do harm to us, do policy and funding cuts. So it's important. Video takers are the same thing. You're documenting for live coverage, for media distribution, and safety and future building. But I'll be clear, do not have your picture taker and your video taker be the same person. It does not work, I think, strategically. Have a separate picture taker, have several picture takers if you need, have several video takers, but don't have them have the same role, the same assignment. The other thing I think is really important, people don't always talk about this role, is art makers. We are creative people, either by nature or by conditions, right? And and that's the way we show love and caring for each other through our art, right? And art can be defined different ways, right? But it's a creative outlet. It brings more life and theatrics. So poster making, skits, street theater, chanters, even chanters are part of art, right? Because people have some beautiful voices sometimes. I have two people who have beautiful voices, and I always have them chanting because the way they belt it and the way they do it is just beautiful. The way they have rhythm on things, in terms of how they sing the chant, it gets other people joining in. So you should have separate chanters too, but art makers are important in this. Before, during, and even sometimes after. So scouts, I never liked that word, but I've not found a good word for it. I was going to say watchers, but even that sounds a little bit um, Arcadian. But scouts take photos of the action before and after a stakeout. When I mean by a stakeout, you remember what I said about point of destruction, point of decision, but also deciding where you want to do the CD. Once you know where you want to do the CD, you need someone to go there before to see how it looks, what's happening there, what it looks in terms of public coming by, what it looks like in terms of crowd control, what it looks like in terms of officers there. I would, you want that so it can help you strategically decide where you're going to place the CDers, how you're going to move the CDers, where you're going to put the supporters who are going to be chanting, where they should move, right? Because officers are going to come in very quickly and they're going to say move, and they're going to yell in your face. Um, they're going to say move. Some of them are going to just keep telling you to move, and you don't know where to move because they don't even tell you exactly where to move. So you want to prepare your folks for that. This is where police liaison and marshals play the role. Police liaison are the only person that manages the communication, talking to the police. They look out because they take part of the CD as the one person that the officer is speaking to. The worst thing you can do is have 20 people being spoken to by an officer or 20 people speaking to the officer. That loses continuity. It loses your momentum. It loses your credibility sometimes, but it also creates chaos and panic sometimes because that's what they want to do many times, officers. So police liaison is a key person to this. Marshals supports the police liaison. Some people think marshals are only needed for a protest or a march. Marchers are needed for many different things, right? And so they play a role in managing the flow of the people, right? Managing the crowd. So when I mentioned that you want to have a scout that will take pictures or show how the location looks like, they come back and then the marshals and everybody else in the team decides where they're going to be standing at, where they're going to be moving as marshals, what points of the space they're going to be standing, how they're going to move the crowd, where do they think they can move the crowd to the safest location, still visibly looking at the CDers, how they're getting arrested, and being able to still chant so people hear you loud and clear. Next slide. So I want to say thank you, but I want to add a few other things to this. These are some key roles, but I'm going to be honest. There are more roles. Sometimes you need more different other roles depending on the CD. These are things are the key ones that you always must have. But sometimes you may need something else. You may need a lookout downstairs, particularly in DC, or someone already at the jail. You may need that. You may need someone already going picking up food. So just for not only for the CDs, for people who may need it. That. You also may need someone on the day of to go back to the site to scope it out again because the dynamics may have changed or the conditions that may change or there's some other event happening at that same location, right? Including if you're going to do a sit-in in an office, elected official office, you may want to have someone go there ahead of time to scope it out too. Sometimes you don't have the time to do so, but I think those are important. Now, the other thing I want to mention, and I think I don't mention it because in terms related to direct action, when you're doing a protest and what you need to wear, right? It's comfortable gear, be hydrated. There's a big contention about face covering. I don't, right? We have this administration has politicized uh, face covering to the point that our authorities can actually kidnap you while being covered, their face covered. We've seen this for our immigrant brothers and sisters. So I say that because you should decide how you think about face covering for safety reasons and everything else, but do not let that deter what needs to be done. Uh, the other thing is phone chargers, situational awareness, knowing where you are going to be standing for yourselves individually, if you're doing the CD or not. Um, the protective gear sometimes is going to be important. I don't suspect right now we're going to be tear gas inside a one of the buildings in DC. There could be a point when we're doing these outside CDs that may be the case. And there's a few things people forget. You can wear goggles. We should have organizers carrying milk. Milk is one way of cleaning out the eyes for that. But I'm gonna be honest. I know so many people who wear contacts, including myself. I take off my contacts. And it sounds simple. It sounds weird, but I took off my contact because tear gas actually um, connects right to the contact, and then it's really hard to take your contacts off and clean your eyes. So if you can wear glasses, is important. I know your glasses can get broken sometimes, or things can happen, but these are little kind of safety issues that are important that we don't think about in the moment of risking arrest or being a part of a collective that has people who are going to risk arrest. So I just want to put some attention to these little nuances. These are the same nuances you have with direct action and protest, but civil disobedience again is either an escalation point because we didn't get what we want to promote highlight, or we're already at that point where we must do it anyway because it's just the only way to bring attention. So I thank everybody, and I know I went a little long on these things, but to me, it's safety, care, and loving that we need when we do these civil disobediences and strategic resistance.
Thank you so very much, Anthony, for breaking that down of what civil disobedience is, how in which what we show up for it, how we can also be able to keep ourselves safe as possible during those things. Some of the things that I definitely like clearly got out of that were definitely making sure that it's important to choose your tactic. It's important to make a plan and scout your location. It is very important to scout the locations that you want to be able to take your direct action at. That is an important piece for us to continue to do. And continue to reach out to your homies, folks, as you are thinking about it and thinking about the different roles that they can take, both as in being the forefront of the action, but also in the many roles that are also supportive. One of the things that I wanted to also uh, make sure that people are understanding when they're also seeing this is this was focused around DC, understanding that a lot of people are planning to do actions in DC, and because a lot of the focal point of who's making these bad decisions around HIV funding have been focused in DC. But I also understand that many people are doing actions in their local communities. I have had places where they have given us 3 warnings. I have also been in places where they gave us 1 warning, and I got arrested, and we did not, and I was not part of like the planning committee around the action and other pieces. But I also made they did have jail support ready. They did make sure that we were supported throughout. And these are other things that were thought through the action. And this was an action that people were not planning to get arrested. So I do understand that those pieces are going around that. So these are things to think about. It's important to choose your message, and also when putting the word out to do it in a discreet way. But also that does make sure that people are also understanding what is going on. And I'll pass it on back to Anthony.
I want to note that one of the ways that we can think about this in terms, because state by state is very different, but police are police in the sense of how they've been treating Black and brown people, LGBT communities across this country, right? Some more severe in other places than others, right? We know that. The environments are very different depending on the neighborhood. But I would say that it's important for us to think about how we incorporate the principles of cop watch, right? And how we deal with that, and even ice watch, right? The way we those kind of ideas and principles, including how you hold yourself or how an officer grabs your arm. There are ways to try to figure it out. Like I'm gonna be honest, I was grabbed the other day um, on my arm completely immobilized, but I knew that they were gonna do it ahead of time, so I was able to keep my arm in a certain way over my neck, so I wouldn't feel the pain. I know that takes time and kind of learning, but I think it's time for us to learn how we do that. And I think buddy systems, I hate that word too, but it's important. When you're in the CD, find somebody to partner with while you're there. Make a friend if even you're new, because you're watching out for each other too. Marshals can see all they can, but you're also eyes and ears for each other.
Thank you so very much for that, Anthony. And I want to be able to add some of those tips for thinking about it. Going to action is to never go to an action or protest rally, especially not a civil disobedience. Try not to ever go to those things alone. Let folks know when you've made it home and when you made it to your or whatever your next destination is. If you are someone that is taking a risk, make sure your folks know your government name and date of birth. That is important just so folks can do some of the follow up. It's also important. I don't think everyone should be going by their or have to go by their government name, but I know that when you go get connected with that system, it is important to have that in order so make people know where you are as that is going along.
And can I note something else here? Because we're in these times. When you were doing a CD planning, I recommended folks who perhaps are undocumented or in the situation. I've advised not them to have to be part of a civil disobedience in terms of getting arrested. Now they may decide they want to be in the group chanting and all that. That requires a whole set of strategic thinking as well, right? Because they can be swept off very quickly. Uh, and so this whole idea of not going alone, but also if you believe you're gonna have someone undocumented in your group, is not to out them out. It's not to tell everybody they're undocumented, obviously. But if they tell you, then you need to think precautions and have your marshals ready to keep close eye of that. Because I have seen already in DC already one civil disobedience with two people, one who was undocumented already taken. Um, by the officers, and I could not find them in the jail. They were taken somewhere else. Mm.
Thank you for bringing that up and goes right next to my next point. Discussing your risk level before going to any protest or any action is important. If you have a record, if you are undocumented, are there any specific medical needs? I have seen where at different times people that needed inhalers or other type of things were not treated very well. And those are things to definitely think about when engaging with this. It's also important when possible, especially in planning a direct action or civil disobedience, is to have people able to have a chance to talk to lawyers. I've done this in the past where just folks, this is what we're planning. This is what the risk of arrest is. Can you tell us all the things that we could potentially go through if we go along with this action? Those are, I think, the best ways about going about doing it. And then people are able to make also individual risk assessments for themselves and for the also collective of thinking about how in which they're moving forward. Anthony?
And, and talk to other people who've been arrested. Hear from them. It could help you um, assess your own participation. And I think us as community-based organizations, grounded in community, we should be sharing even more when we do our own citizenship what has happened, because we start figuring out the patterns and we can actually figure out arrests. Like, for example, ADAP folks were arrested a few weeks ago. They came back to me and told me how it happened, and we were better prepared as housing works to do a CD in the same location because they told us exactly what happened, and we were preparing for that.
Thank you for that. If possible, bringing your own medical kit bandages, definitely bringing in water. Water's helpful, especially when it's hot. Um, as Anthony said, these many times actions are not the most comfortable things, but being able to have space to be able to do so is an important piece to do so. Um, and then especially for a risk around, especially when it comes down to perpetrating others, travel size of MIC, so gauze of vinegar. If you have specific medical needs, consider wearing a bracelet with your conditions, consider your medication close to you and your body. And if you're having making sure that you have phone numbers that you would like to call just in case, and in case you do need to make any of those calls. Um, uh, Bring sometimes a little bit of cash. You shouldn't need that for DC at all. You shouldn't need them generally to get arrested, but sometimes that is helpful. Just for I have done direct actions from East, West Coast, Midwest, and South. They look different in different places. I will also say majority of the places I've gotten arrested have been major cities, but I have also done many direct action in capital city or towns that are not very big. Um, and also in more rural areas, I also understand that it looks different. And again, as it is understanding how in which the police are reacting to this and understanding how people have dealt with most recent actions are important. Um, and then watch for the people that could be either quote unquote doing too much. I've dealt with infiltration of actions or people trying to sideline what an action is trying to actually move forward. That is important for the marshals to also engage with, but everyone should be vigilant of this because we don't want people that were not part of the planning of the action or anything trying to escalate an action or do something quote unquote that causes others to potentially be in more dangerous situations just because of other of the actions that they are taking.
Can I
Uh,
re-emphasize that part, Max? The
yeah,
infiltration goes in different spaces, right? Is during the planning, you can have infiltration, and also after the planning, and at the action, right? People heckling and doing something to instigate with folks, and so marshals are important, but everyone knowing how to probably like chant louder or do certain things is going to be important because we're the more, right? Mostly at these places. But I have a feeling we're going to get much more of these either public figures or people who like to heckle, and some of them are professional hecklers. They actually go around the whole country to kind of like push back on people. I have one that comes to many of my rallies, but I've learned to um, cut them out.
had a history of one of those in Chicago, definitely dealt with, and also here in Atlanta. Also, this is also important for your security team, people that are also tied with police liaisons and others, of also how in which you engage potential hecklers slash people that are infiltrating and making the action move in a way that is not asked for the group. And it's important for the security team and those that are connected in those groups to do so. We could do a whole separate training around that, and I will be honest. But that is something that if you ever are dealing with encouraging people that have had a lot of history in doing actions or have been a part of it to be able to also support in those is always best in those spaces. I'm going to go pass it on over to Jeremiah. And then Anthony also put a piece in the chat. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Thanks, Max, and many thanks, Anthony. This is fantastic. Really useful information, particularly as I think the movement is just going to have to, if we haven't been utilizing these sorts of tactics in recent years, it's definitely, an important time to consider what we're doing in terms of using the full advocacy tool belt. And I have to jump off it in just a few minutes. So I wanted to just say real quick, thank you. Also, too, like I really appreciate the way that you talk about nonviolence from a perspective of strategy. And just to be clear, what the Save HIV Funding Campaign is going to be doing is always nonviolent. But in recent years, I've gotten into a lot of conversations with advocates who are maybe newer to doing sorts of actions and gotten into this debating about nonviolence versus violence in terms of right versus wrong. But I'm very much in your camp that this is a strategic conversation. This is about shifting public opinion. And as soon as we're engaging in something that is violent or it can be construed as violent, it completely changes the dynamics with the public. You can get that backlash, and it can invite opponents to then be more violent. And so I think it's not an easy pathway to win. And from an advocacy standpoint, I usually see it as a losing pathway. Um, all that to say, one question I have for you, Anthony, and curious where you are. Just this week, Trump is talking about deploying the National Guard in DC and starting to, perhaps lock down DC in various ways. How What advice do you have for advocates in terms of even doing actions in DC? I know we all just need to pay attention. It's hard to know what's happening, but how are you guys sort of considering that or thinking about that right now as those comments escalate?
I've been going through this in my head for like months. Even when Trump just got in office, thinking about it from how fascist regimes work. And so I've been thinking hard, long and hard. I don't have a real full answer yet because I'm still struggling. I just want to be honest with that. But I realize that our tactics and everything I just spoke about and Max spoke about doesn't change. You just have to, all those things will help with that still. Mm. Um, I also think that it it may be necessary to have more of a strong rapid response team than ever before. Uh, those situations with the military is going to require that there's a set group, well trained, well done on their thinking for rapid response there. Because there's one thing asking the National Guard to like block off half of the White House and do something. There's another thing where you're doing the CD and all of a sudden they're coming out of nowhere, right? They come out of surprise, right? Look what happened with LA, right? Uh, and I think it behooves us, and I'm having this conversation in Kansas City and with LA folks about what they did and what they're putting together, and I'm willing to share some of their lessons there soon. Part of me being in Kansas City was to galvanize a set of Latinos and Congress people around some of the issues because now I'm starting to go more nationally on these issues. But to be honest, I don't know what the answer is. I hope maybe someone here could probably answer it too, But we've gone through this before where National Guards have come and hold us down. So not like we don't know what we've from the past. Mm.
One thing that I want to add to that, and I thank you for answering that, Anthony, and bringing this up, Jeremiah, is one is also to recruit veterans. I think one, I am also one, but I think knowing folks that are that have been in military service to also be able to talk through tactics, but also de-escalate situations, particularly with those that are forced to be in those situations, and understanding how in which to move forward. Military personnel are not trained to deal with protesters. That is not, and not American protesters. Let's put it that way. That is not what they are trained to deal with. Most police aren't either, but that is something for us to make sure that we're doing as is recruiting from different communities, but making sure that we're also being able as you have said, Anthony, is like that don't change what we're doing. We gonna keep doing the actions that are necessary to do this. One of the things I was also put in the chat was also we will send out a list of resources and examples to along with the follow up to this, especially after we upload this one to the website. I also want to highlight that some of the things that we will be sharing and some of the things that I've been sharing from have come out from the Blackout Collective and the Ruckus Society, who are also folks who trained me in direct action and civil disobedience some years ago. And I have also many friends that are still a part of that and still doing and training folks in actions across the country, including doing one here in Atlanta this weekend. So there's a lot of wonderful opportunities, and if you are interested in this, definitely look into those, and also even what Housing Works is doing, and look into being able to do an in-person direct action training. In order to further understand and solidify your skills in this. And then one of the best places to be able to do this is practice. And as Anthony said, meeting 30 minutes before an action to meet and make sure everything's being able to do. I always, as we say, scouting is important, but walking through the different actions that you're doing in order for folks to feel as comfortable as possible is a very important piece. I also do want to give up. We are. Can you ever have the police on your side? In a civil disobedience, not really, but there are times where those people are less uh can at times you can push them to a way that where they are less violent towards those that are a part of the action. And at times I've seen it and I've seen an action where there was multiple police in the jurisdiction. Say there was there's highway patrol, there's the city police, there's the county police, and they're all like dealing with who needs to do. I'll say the state patrol was definitely escalating further than the city was doing at that particular time. And this is also something to think about in a place like DC where there's a lot of different jurisdictions of police. Um, and one, it's important to know who has actual jurisdiction where you're at, depending on if you're in the highway or if you're on a county building, or if you're on a private building. These are all different things. Different uh, police precincts are in charge of different things. But we've seen where the city police were telling the highway patrol pretty much back off and telling them that they were doing too much. And they were actually escalating the situation. So we actually, our police liaison was helping in some ways de-escalate the police from from each other in order for them one, it gave us more time to be in the action, and it actually ended up no one ended up actually going to jail. They just gave everyone tickets.
Can I,
uh,
Max, can I flip this real quick?
yes.
I agree with you 100%, but this is just my nature of never trusting and believing police can be on your side. Institutionalization of how they work, right? But that is why I said strategic resistance. Nothing worse than being very structured, very well organized. It makes it harder for them in some ways. So that's what I meant about keeping everything as close and minimizing the harm, right? But we know you can't guarantee the safety and all, but you can use the public and use other things to your advantage when police are surrounding you. When police are doing things. That's part of where cop watch trainings come in.
Thank you so very much. And yeah, in general, I don't trust the police. Um, there has to be as typically there is good to have at least one person that is engaging with police as a police liaison, to be having someone and not be the only person really talking and engaging with police. That is my preference. I've also seen people do it slightly different ways. Um, and again, in action and doing a civil disobedience, as Anthony is also is to not be governable in those spaces, and it is also questioning uh, how in which the people that are making decisions, why they're making those decisions, and why they think that they can continue to move as business as usual. So, being ungovernable is in the space of a direct action or civil disobedience is also important. while also understanding people's safety. I do understand, and we have kept people a good amount of time. I do want to open up space if there are any other questions. But if not, I wanted to say one, thank y'all all for taking up this time and space. Again, we will be sending this out with added resources, along with making sure and adding people. Please get involved, not just with this campaign, but with local campaigns and engaging with the work in which y'all are doing around direct actions. But also, if you have questions, you have thoughts around this, please reach out to us. If you are interested in being a part of anyone action moving forward or are mobilizing, organizing, and action calls that we have every other Wednesday, please reach out to me. You will have access to my email. Again, my name is Max Boykin. I'm the manager of the Save HIV Funding Campaign. Anthony, who is vice president at Housing Works, has just dropped his email in there as well for folks to reach out. Thank y'all so very much. And we will go ahead and close out this training. And thank y'all for being a part of this training series. And we will continue to keep our legislators accountable in Accountability August and our Summer of Advocacy to make sure our legislators know that we are continuing to save HIV funding and protect our communities that are most impacted. Thank y'all so very much. And y'all have a good rest of your week and a wonderful
Gracias, everybody.
Accountability August. Thank you, Anthony. Thank y'all.